Hey, welcome to Taylor's Trick-Taking Table. I'm Trick, and I just got out of the shower. That's why I look a little bit like a meatball. But the games we are covering today, because it's still just in June, and what's more just in than the Tokyo Game Market that recently happened? I wish I could go, I'm going to go in fall. I sadly missed this spring, but through the wonderful world of forwarding and games being shipped, I was able to get two of them that I'll cover today, and they are similar. They're kind of like two peas in a Four Clans conflict, and that they're both two-player kind of lane battler trick-taking games, a little bit like Air, Land, and Sea, if you're familiar, or that Marvel game, where players will be playing to different tricks whenever they want to, and obviously there's differences and kind of unique aspects to these both of these games, which I'll teach them both in a little bit, that make them so fun and so interesting in the two-player trick-taking space, which I think is a fun realm to keep exploring. But Peas, before I keep going, is designed by Koto Kono, and Four Clans Conflict is designed by Yatsuyuki Nakamura, I believe. But if these games strike your fancy, and if you wanted to learn more about the wonderful Tokyo Game Market, I know there were two YouTubers who went, and one is Thinker Themer. Amy and Maggie did a wonderful cover that I'll link in the description. And also, Jay, Cardboard East, did a wonderful video as well, kind of covering, Tokyo Game Market and the hall, and I think he has more videos to come. So huge shout out to those two, and especially Jay, who also has Board Games Asia subreddit. It's called R Board Games Asia, I think that's it. But yeah, go check out if you're a Reddit user, if you want to learn more about board games coming from Asia. Because if you follow the channel, I have tried to make well aware the fact that trick-taking is huge coming out of Japan especially. So if you want more places to chat, news, everything Reddit does, which it's kind of everything, definitely check that out. Anyway, let's go to the table and I'll teach you how to play. The deck in Peas is made up of 4 suits numbered 1 to 6. Here we have the game set up for the only 2 players, so each player is going to get dealt 10 cards, meaning there's going to be 4 left over. Just keep those hidden out of the game. Then you're going to have the ends of the pea pod here. I think that's what it's called. And in the middle here, you're going to have the 10 pea cards, which are going to have different values, 1, 2, maybe -2, all the way up to 3. These are going to be the 10 tricks that are going to be fought over simultaneously during the game. Each player also is going to have a little beanstalk. This is just going to keep note of how many times they win a round, because it's best of 3 rounds. So if you win a round, you just flip it. And if you go to flip it and it's already flipped, then you would win. And this is the start player marker, just a little tiny P in some white space here. So starting with the person with the first P part, they can play to any of the 10 tricks. So looking at Pluto's hand here, they can play any card they want. And maybe they just play a 4 to here. Coming over to Donald Duck's hand, almost a Daffy Duck, they can play again to any of the tricks. If there's a card that's already played there, they must follow suit. So if they did want to play to this 1 here, they would have to play one of their yellows. Again, kind of interestingly, because they can play anywhere, they could play this 2 and the 6 to other tricks over the course of the game, and so then when they come back to here, then they could play any card. And maybe that's what they will do. So they're going to play a 2 to here, and then the movement goes to Pluto. And so tricks like this are just going to keep going back and forth, and players are just going to be going through all the 10 tricks. And again, like maybe Daffy plays that 6 there. You can play to any trick that you want to at any moment. The first time a player plays over here, they will take the end of the pepper, kind of. So let's just show an example here. If Donald plays the 1, the end is going to move up to them. It's just whoever played first over here. And that just dictates who's going to be the leader over there. After all the cards have been played, you're just going to evaluate all the 10 tricks, starting from the stem over here all the way down to the bottom of the pod. And it is going to be led by whoever has the endo card toward them. So Daffy Duck leads a 1. Again, in the trick play, there's no trump. So it's the highest of the led suit. So it would be pink here. So down here, Pluto was offsuit with the 4. So Daffy, or Donald, oh my gosh. Donald wins that trick. Donald leads with the 6 and would win this trick. Leads with the 2, would win this trick. Leads with the 4, win that trick. Win that trick. Leads with the 2. Finally, Pluto wins 1. Now Pluto is leading from here, so leads with the 3. So Pluto wins that trick. Pluto leads with the blue, and so that actually goes to Donald. Then Donald leads with the 6 and the purple. So Donald wins all the rest. And so the scores are -4 to 4. So the winner of the round is whoever lost in every single card. So you can kind of shoot the moon in this scenario where you don't win anything. But if that doesn't happen, you do count the scores and whoever has a high score wins. So in this case, Pluto beat Donald. If it was a tie, it's whoever has the little P card. So then you would reshuffle and reset the beans out. You'd reshuffle these cards. Pluto, who won, would flip their token here and you'd play again. If Pluto wins a second time, they win the whole game. But if not, you play best out of 3. The deck in 4 Clans Conflict is 4 suits numbered 1 through 7. Here we have the game set up for the only 2 players. So you're going to put the 4 different color castles in the center with 3 cubes each. You're going to deal 1 player 12 cards and 1 player 13 cards, meaning there's going to be 3 cut for the game. No one looks at these, you just set them aside for this round. To finish setup, the player who got 12 cards is going to look at their hand and move one of these cubes from one tower to another. And the reason they do that is going to be explained later. Let's just say they move 1 cube from the black to the green. After seeing this, the player who got dealt 13 is going to look at their hand and they are going to discard a card. Maybe they discard this 4 here. After discarding, the 13 player will then lead to the first trick. There will be 12 tricks in the game, and each of the 4 spots will get played to 3 times by each player. So for example, for the first trick, let's say this pup player here, they play a 5 in the green suit to the red castle. The suit you play doesn't have to go to that color castle, but the game is must follow. So the suit you play means the other player has to follow suit. So looking at the top player's hand here, they have to play any green they have, so they are forced to play this too. Interestingly enough though, they can play it to any castle, so maybe they play it here. How a trick evaluates is the loser of the trick is going to flip their card and they're going to take, if there is some, a cube from that castle. This is a little bit of a treasure here. These are victory points, so each cube is worth 1 victory point. The winner of the trick will leave their card face up, and now this is the strength that they are attacking this castle. And notice how when a card's flipped, that's only 1 strength. So the loser player's card got weaker, so they're now attacking with a weaker card at this castle, but they did get 1 victory point for it. So now the winner will lead again, and so maybe they play the 3. Again, it is a must-follow game, and we know that this player doesn't have any green anymore, so they can play whatever card they want. Maybe they play this 4 blue over here. It would flip because it lost, because it is highest in the lead suit that wins. But they lost on this castle, which gave its last cube. And why that's important is, if a castle ever loses its last cube, it flips. And notice a flipped castle just went from 3 to 4 victory points. I'll explain the victory points later. But the important thing for the trick play for a flipped castle is the suit that was flipped is now trump for the next trick. So now if this bottom player here leads a green again, so maybe they lead a 4 to here, this top player can play a black and then they would win the trick. So this 4 would actually now flip. And again, you only collect treasure if there's treasure there. So even though this player lost and would collect a treasure, there's no cubes on this castle, so they don't get any points. Black was only trump for that trick, so now if this person's leading and they play a 5 red, if this bottom player didn't have red, this black wouldn't be trump. It still is the highest of the lead suit. Interestingly enough, they do have red, and maybe they really want to control here. So maybe they play this 7 red, since 7 is bigger than 5. This flips. Again, there's no treasure here, so this player doesn't collect it at all. And now neither player can play to this castle here anymore. Jumping ahead a little bit, let's say this bottom player led the 1. And again, since it's must follow, the player has to play black. They have to play the 7, which is rough for them because in the game, 7s lose to 1s. So this 7 would actually flip. At least they played it to a spot that had a cube, so they do get that point. But the bottom player here won the trick. Here we are at the end of the round, and how scoring works is you're going to check who won a castle by counting the strength on either side. So as you can see over here, this was 4 to 3, so this bottom player won this castle. Whereas this red castle was 16 to 12, so the top player won. And if you win a castle with cubes on it, you also win that treasure. So this player is going to collect those 2 treasure cubes and this castle. With the rest of the castles sorted, players are now going to count up how many points they got in the round. First, they're going to count all the points that they got from castles, and then all the points from treasure. So down here, this player, they got 8, plus 3 cubes of treasure, so that's worth 11 points. Whereas this player up here got 6 plus 9, so they actually got 15. So this player won the match. And that's the first round. The game is played over 2 rounds, and you're going to keep track of this total because after the end of the second round, you're going to add both the first and the second round totals and see whoever did the best. For the second round, you're actually going to switch roles. So whoever was the 12th player that got to move a cube is going to be the 13th player that actually waits after the cube movement and discards a card. So you're going to have to play both sides during the game. And that's how to play 4 Clans Conflict. Some small caveats: if there's ever a tie over the strength, no one gets the castle or the cubes on it. Also, in some super rare edge case, if one player gets dealt all the 7s and all the 1s, they do say to reshuffle. So that is Peas and 4 Clans Conflict. Let's talk about Peas first. I love the production. It's super silly, very clean graphic design. And we talked about this with Spy Tricks and Crime Hotel, where the tiny cards are a little bit, because they're hard to shuffle and they're hard to like hold. But there's something to, I don't know if it's just the game's called Peas or like it's really tiny and it's kind of meant to be like very small. But the cards weren't too bad. I think they also help because when you're building that pea pod, you have 10 tricks and then the 2 pea ends. And if it was the size, if the cards were the size of like a normal card, it would just take up a ton of space on that table. So I do actually appreciate these tiny cards. They're very cute. But to the gameplay, I think it's really interesting. I love the fact that there's kind of 10 lanes and there's a ton of openness to the trick, and the fact that you can kind of play whatever you want, and there's a little bit of like kind of a game of chicken in a way, because you're slowly not wanting to reveal your hand to the other player. I love that there's 4 cards cut. I think it's super important in 2-player games when there's not perfect information, just so it doesn't become like rote and very obvious. But kind of what do you show and where do you show part of your hand to your opponent is really interesting. When I read the rules, because there's those 2 end conditions, or like win conditions rather, it's either you take no tricks or you take the most points. I thought the taking no tricks was going to be harder, but the fact that there's no trump and it's just a 2-player game, it's sometimes pretty easy. Like if you have all of one suit or most of one suit, because 4 are cut, it's not too hard to really plan out the hand. There'll just be like sometimes some tricks that happen and you're like, oh, wait, yeah, this is like really easy just to not take any tricks anymore. I think that the game is most interesting when there is like a balanced hand. When you get all of one suit, it becomes a little bit more obvious, and maybe not obvious to the other player yet, but like if they don't have any of that suit in their hand, they kind of know already that they're not going to win any of those tricks. So I kind of wish there was a trump suit in the game, just so that the interesting part of the game to me is when the lead kind of like bounces back and forth, and when do you take lead and go back and forth between those things. But I think what happens most often is it's kind of this inevitable puzzle where you kind of will either lose lead based on like the last trick, or it kind of just becomes a little bit of a, oh, this one small thing happened and then like this cascading happened, rather than this really interesting back and forth over those 12 tricks. So maybe it's an expectation thing, because an obvious game similar to this, Ghost of Christmas, in that obvious comparison to Ghost of Christmas, I think Ghost of Christmas is just a little bit more interesting because you have the 3 and the 4 player dynamic, but also just the fact that there's a trump suit, I think is just inherently more interesting. It feels like Peas has sometimes some obvious plays where, you know, if you have a 6 in a suit and you just play it to the first trick, you can just win that, and then you can almost like reverse engineer sometimes, where you're like, okay, I'm going to win this and this and this and this and this, and I'm mostly fine, especially because I know I'm going to like lose to them here, so they're not going to win them all. So sometimes it just becomes almost like a puzzle, and the other player doesn't know it's a puzzle. They're like, ooh, I might like eke stuff out, but then in your mind you're like, no, I have it kind of sorted. So I felt kind of bad in certain hands of Peas, where even like open information, you can like flip it over and you could be like, oh, if I play this one card here, you're just like done. So I think it's meant to be like a really quick kind of like a match game, and you go back and forth. But it just feels tough when you're 5 tricks into like a 10 trick hand and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm not gonna win this. Or like, oh, everything I do is like moot, I'm definitely gonna win this or not take any tricks. So you feel clever though. So I'm kind of like of two minds where it is like a little bit of a puzzle. You do feel interesting and do feel clever, and there are some fun moments, but sometimes there's a little bit obvious plays. It doesn't lean into the idea of like a fun back and forth, like, oh, you won that one. Oh, but I took the lead here. Oh, but you won that one. Just because there is no trump, and you get this like kind of, what's the right word, like a landslide of wins in a row, or kind of like, it's almost like you're setting up this really elaborate like 10 trick like Rube Goldberg machine, but oftentimes it just feels less like an intricate Rube Goldberg machine and more just like dominoes that you like poke once and then it all falls. Maybe that's a good analogy. That to say, I do like Peas overall. I think it is just a little bit lighter of a let's see what kind of happens match type game with some interesting ideas, but maybe a little bit of an obvious play at times. Still really, really cool. Four Clans Conflict, I really, really enjoy. I think I like this a little bit more than Peas. Obviously, differences for sure, but the fact that Four Clans has some interesting balancing right at the start, which I like. The fact that one player gets 13 cards while the other gets 12, but then the person who gets 12 gets to change those cubes on the castles is really cool. The interesting part of the game to me is the timing of the trump. So when do you play to a lane to lose and get a point, and then trigger that trump to try to gain control, wrestle control in just the right trick? And the fact that it's must follow is interesting, and the 7s lose to the 1s. There's just like a good amount of balance in the game. And I don't think it's a critique, but it's like a very balanced game. We talked about this with, was it Brian Boru? Where sometimes games, if they're too well balanced, they almost feel like there's like an irony to it, to where it's like similar to like a chaotic game where you're like, I could play whatever, I could do whatever, and I would still like do well in the game. I could still make it out in the game. And here, it borderlines on that a little bit, because if you lose, you take a cube, which is a point. And like, if you just time the losing, you're just gonna have a ton of treasure. But then that's balanced by the other person winning, just having a bunch of points from the castles. And usually, like, even though sometimes I'll feel like I played pretty poorly or played really well, the scores will be super balanced just because of like the treasure thing. So it almost becomes like a very subtle game. Like, you win by small amounts, which I like, but it is a very like comically like razor's edge type of game. But overall, I think there's some really cool subtleties to winning and running out the suit on another player. I think I noticed this in Peas and Four Clans Conflict, where an interesting part of two-player games is like how deep someone is in a suit, especially if like there isn't too much trump in the game, and how you can just like run them out of that suit and have like a ton of control. So for example, like in Peas, if I know I have most of a suit or all of a suit, that's like a huge weapon, and I can just like either take nothing for a long time or take everything for a long time, just because there's no trump. And for Clans, it does a really good job of, if you do that for too long, the other player can just lose a bunch to a castle, flip the castle, and then hopefully they have a card, like a high card in the trump suit that just got turned on for that next trick, right? So there's really cool ways to like get control back in Four Clans that I enjoyed, especially because you can only play 3 times each lane. Each lane has kind of like incentives to lose to it early, and if you rush those incentives, it becomes less interesting to lose there. So players are kind of trying to time their losses. Like, it always feels bad to lose to a castle that's already flipped. So there's really interesting kind of like tempo to the game of Four Clans, and I really like the back and forth of it. It does genuinely feel almost like Air, Land, and Sea, the Trick Taker. So I would definitely recommend Four Clans if you wanted a game that had a good amount of balance to it, some really interesting back and forth to it, and hands that just never feel like you're too far out of it. There's a feeling where one time I had a 10 of green, so I was leading green, and I noticed they were trying to turn black on for a trick. So I was doing that, but it was like early enough in the round where even though I let them turn it into black to wrestle control back, I knew they still had a blue. So then I played a high blue, and I nullified that trick where trump was black to try to still have tempo. But then, interestingly enough, they made, I think it was red, trump a little bit later, and I was just like a little bit too late to then wrestle control back. And by the time they had turned both black and red into trump, they had a ton of treasure, and then they had control later on, and they won a castle. So it was like really balanced. And even though if you have like a ton of a suit in the game and try to like run it out, there's still a lot of options for the person who doesn't have control. Just because they can lose in certain places, still get a point, and then start dictating what trump is. So it's cool. It's cool that even though you're winning and having stronger attacks on a castle, the other player has a little bit of agency of what suit is strong for the next trick, or like which castles are worth more points or less points. So there's some cool back and forth in the game. I think it's like a nice balanced kind of duel of sorts. So that is Four Clans Castle and Peas. You can hopefully search these out and get them. If you can't, both of these are easy to make with just a deck of cards, because it's 1 through 6 and 1 through 7 and 4 suits. So you probably have that available. You'll just need maybe a little bit of creativity to make these cards. So yeah, hopefully you can get a play-in of these, because I think they are really fun and showcase some really cool things coming out of Tokyo Game Market and Japan right now. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!